Morrell, the host of Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast, and we have with us my co-host Greg Tyler.
Hello, everyone.
And our special guest, Neil Ross. Before we get started with our interview with Neil Ross, Bob Koppler has a presentation he would like to make.
Thank you, Marc. Thanks. Neil, I just wanted to say on behalf of World Events Productions, it is an honor for you to be at VoltCon. We are the biggest fans that you have. We are so indebted to you. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I mean, 41 years later, and the fandom keeps going, and it's largely attributable to the memorable performance that you had as Keith and Pidge. Your voice brought this show to life, and we couldn't thank you enough. And we just wanted to present you with this jersey that you will always be part of Team Voltron. You will always be in our heart, and we wanted to present this jersey to you. So thank you.
Arms away.
If you want, I can put it somewhere safe. Yeah, please do. Thank you.
All right. We could have thunk it 40 years ago, huh?
Right? So you've been to many Transformers conventions, right? G.I. Joe. This is the first Voltron convention you've been where it's
That
been
is correct.
specifically about Voltron,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Never
Okay.
done another one.
So how does it feel to be in front of all the Voltron fans?
Well, I keep saying it's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, when we did these shows in the 80s, the common wisdom in those days was, it'll last about 3 years, the kids will outgrow it and forget all about it, and that'll be the end of it. And anybody who would have suggested that 40 years later you would be flying to conventions and doing shows like this, they would have said, you're out of your mind. I think in those days, the longest running animated show was probably the Smurfs. I think they got 7 years, 7 seasons. But we just assumed this would all be forgotten. And all the actors that I talked to were just blown away by the fans and the fact that people remember after all these years. It's so gratifying. As some of you may know, I started out in the radio business, and my old radio buddies, it's like it never happened. It's like they were writing on water. Nobody remembers, nobody gives a damn. But to have you folks show up and want to see me and talk to me and meet me, it's just amazing. Just amazing. Very gratifying.
After we do our interview, we're going to have a Q&A session, and all the fans are going to be able to ask questions. So get your questions ready. In the meantime, I wanted to talk about...
Don't ask what my PIN number is. I may be old, but I'm not stupid.
The last time that we had you on the podcast was in 2018, and that was when you had published your book.
Yeah.
Neil Ross, Vocal Recall, A Life in Radio and Voiceovers. And this is basically your life.
Yeah.
Your autobiography.
That's pretty much it. And even if you don't enjoy the book, as you can see, it makes a hell of a doorstop.
And not just the paperback, okay? There's also an audio version of the book that you did yourself, right?
Yes, I won a very competitive audition to get that job. I was the best actor I could find for free. And it's available at Audible, and the physical book is available at Amazon. If you want to stop by and take one of these postcards that will tell you how to get the book, feel free, or stop by my table. I have more of these.
And also following this immediately, this panel, you will be providing autographs in the autograph halls at your table.
Yeah.
Okay, so make sure that you go there for that. All right, go ahead, Greg.
I just had a very quick question about your convention experience, and it seems like properties that originated in the 80s seem to have a particular tendency to stick culturally. Many of us are fans of numerous properties from the 80s in particular. Have you noticed anything from prior decades? Does it seem like there's something special about the 80s and going forward? Or like Clutch Cargo from, what, the 60s, I think?
I guess.
Or some of the Hanna-Barbera properties, or even Super Friends. That kind of stuff that didn't really have the convention impact that things of the 80s did.
No, I don't know what changed. It's interesting. As I said, the conventional wisdom was that you would get about 2 to 3 years if you were lucky on a show. And then the kids would outgrow it, and the new crop of kids coming up would want their own shows. And so, you know, all of this stuff was seen as very disposable. And for some reason, some of these shows in the 80s just stuck. And people remained huge fans, and I don't really know what to attribute it to. Possibly the fact that up to a certain point, the only animation on television was basically Saturday mornings and a little bit of Sunday mornings. And then, as I mentioned in the book, Ronald Reagan came along. You may have heard of him, and he was into deregulation, and he appointed a guy to run the FCC who was into deregulation, and they deregulated children's television to a great degree, and that made it economically feasible to do shows for local television stations that ran on weekday afternoons. And of course, when you're doing a show that only runs once a week, you can get away with 13 episodes. But in order to have 13 weeks without a repeat, if you're doing a Monday through Friday show, you need 65 episodes. So suddenly we start doing these 65 episode shows. And Voltron, I think, ran 125 episodes all told. And maybe that's what made the difference, is you saw them more often on weekday afternoons. And we meet a lot of fans who were sort of latchkey kids, and they would get through with school and dash home and watch these shows. And maybe that's part of it, the fact that it was so readily available on a Monday through Friday basis. I don't know. But yeah, you're right. Nobody seems to, much that I'm aware of. Of course, I didn't break into the business until the 80s, so I don't have any gauge. But I don't hear too much about the shows in the 60s and 70s. But for some reason in the 80s, a tremendous amount of fan loyalty happened. And it remains right up until today. The 4 big shows for me are Voltron, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Spider-Man. I hear about other shows a little bit, but those are the 4 big ones.
So, in talking about one of your first roles as a lead role was Keith.
Yeah, I was very new to the business. I was a disc jockey sitting in San Diego looking at Saturday morning animation and saying, I could do that. And then 2 seconds later, who are you kidding? You can't do that. And, there's nobody in San Diego qualified to tell you whether you're any good or not. So I just had to go up to Los Angeles and see what happened. And this was, the Voltron was the first big animation job I ever got. I had done incidental roles in other shows, but suddenly I'm basically playing the lead character. And so that was a huge job.
It's about the reason that he loved you so much was because you could do so many different voices and you wouldn't even know it was you.
Yes, in those days that had tremendous importance. When they cast, they wanted to know whether you could also do incidental voices because the union contract allowed them to ask you to do 3 characters per session. So you would come in and you would have your main character, and then they'd say you're also doing the fireman and the parking lot attendant. And they might only have 2 or 3 lines, but they wanted them to obviously sound different from your main character. Some of us could do that and some couldn't. I don't know if it had to do with talent, or some people just seem to have such distinctive voices that they can't disguise them. They try to do something like this and it doesn't work. But the essential voice print breaks through and you go, that's the same guy. But some of us were able to do 3 different characters. I often have people coming up and going, geez, I just found out you did blah, blah, blah. I never would have thought that.
You had spoken about Mr. Potato Head.
Oh,
Can you tell that story to everybody, please?
Well, it really isn't my thing. It's Michael Bell's who came up with it. But he described because people will ask, well, how many voices do you do? Which, they obviously have a mental picture of me having 23 voices, and I go to an audition and I look at the material and I say, for this one I'll use voice 11. And that isn't how it works. Michael's description is very apt. I guess you're all familiar with the toy Mr. Potato Head. If you're not, it's an oval and you put glasses on it and noses and ears and mouths and make it change. According to Michael, and he's right, we're doing that vocally. You show up for an audition, you look at the picture of the character, you read the description, and hopefully you hear a voice in your head. And then when you get in the audition, you try to reproduce it. And you try to have one or two backups in case the people across the glass go, that's terrible, got anything else? Hopefully you do, but we're just sort of putting vocal mouths and ears and noses and guys, you remember you're just playing with your voice until you stumble into something that they like. And you're looking at the directors and producers across the glass, and unless they hit the talkback button, you can't hear what they're saying. So in this case, I was doing a commercial, a national television commercial for Del Monte. And the directors were these two young ladies who came down from San Francisco. And after every take, I would see this.
Okay, do it again.
Do it again. All I'm thinking is, he's horrible. Why did we hire him? Well, I don't know. You picked him. No, I didn't. You picked him. And then at a certain point, they just said, okay, you're done. Come on out, sign the contract. I have no idea what they were saying to each other. Which was horrible, but they might have been talking about where they were going to have lunch. I don't know. So from that point on, I made a vow, until they actually put the button on and say, you are awful, go away. I'm just going to assume everything's fine. And that's what I've done.
Well, everything is fine because you're here with us, and we're glad to have you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
I did want to ask, your book starts with you having a sort of a reminiscence you're about to give the announcements of the 75th Annual Academy Awards, and you're looking back and thinking back to how everything started. So you've just mentioned during this chat that you started as a DJ. Can you take us back to how you got into using your voice to as part of your profession?
Yeah. Well, I started fooling around with doing voices at a very young age. We didn't have television until I was about 11 or 12, so it was all the radio for me and a record player. The dirty little secret is I really wanted to be a radio actor, but all the radio dramas ended by the time I got out of high school, so that was not an option. So animation was the closest I could get. But anyway, at the age of, 5, 6, or 7, I would listen to the radio and I was just fascinated by all the different voices and accents that I heard coming out of that thing. And I was able to hear a fair amount of really good radio stuff that they produced. I was in Canada at the time, stuff that they produced in Canada, but I also heard a lot of the American radio shows, the dramas, suspense, and stuff like that. And stuff from the BBC in England. They would broadcast quite a bit of that in Canada. And so I really heard a range of voices and accents. And I would start trying to reproduce what I heard in my room at the age of 5 or 6. It was no idea of making a profession out of it. It was just fun to play with my voice. And my father thought I was a half-wit. But, I've got a son who sits in his room and talks to himself. Where did I go wrong? And, I sort of got out of that habit. I would use it to punch up a dirty joke in the lunch court when I was in high school. But when I was about I don't know, 12 or 13, Elvis came along and rock and roll music, and I started listening to top 40 radio stations. And when I was about 15, 16 years old, I suddenly thought, God, you know, maybe I could be a disc jockey. Because I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And it became kind of an obsession, and I got into radio, and I did radio for about 20 years. And during that part of my career, I would do the occasional little character voice, but it never really caught on. And then as I began to become disenchanted with radio, at the same time I discovered that voiceover actually existed as a business, as a profession. I had no idea. I thought the voices that I heard on these commercials and cartoon shows were all on camera people moonlighting, and which probably was true in some cases, but I found out there actually was a voiceover business. There were people who did nothing but voiceovers. There were agents. It was a whole thing, but it was one of the best kept secrets in show business in those days. Now the cat's out of the bag. God is out of the bag. Everybody and his nephew wants to be in voiceovers, but in those days hardly anybody knew they existed. So once I found out there was such a thing, then I said, that's for me. I cannot think of a job closer to a job that will allow me to use as much of my so-called talent as possible. I think radio, I was only using about 40% of what I had to give. Voiceovers took pretty much 100%, so that was the business for me.
So over the years, there have been some pretty, really good voice directors that you've worked with, Gordon Hunt, Wally Burr, Andrea Romano.
Yeah.
Who do you think, in your mind, brought the best out of it?
Interesting. You know, it's hard. What is my best? I don't know. That these directors, they all had such different ways of going about things. Gordon Hunt was a lovely man. He's Helen Hunt's father, the actress Helen Hunt. And he was a lovely guy, came out of the theater. He was very actor-friendly. He would never ask you to do a line more than 3 times. Because if you start having to do a line over and over again, you just sort of hit a mental block, and the other actors are all staring at their shoes, and you're going, oh, let me get this damn line right. And the takes build up, and gradually you can't even say your own name without making a mistake. Gordon would never go beyond 3 takes, and you would sort of know in the back of your mind he still didn't have what he wanted. But what would happen is the session would end. He'd say, all right, everybody, great, sign your contracts. We'll see you again next time. Oh, Neil, could you wait around after the session? I want to talk to you about something. Oh, okay. And then he'd say, can we try that line one more time? I'd say, sure, Gordon. And now everybody's left and the pressure's off, and you nail it on take 1. But other directors would just make you do it over again. And Michael Bell's in the back going, could you get the line right? I'd like to go to my daughter's high school graduation. It's coming up in a couple of years. They probably all did in different ways, I really, there were no directors that I flat out hated or disliked. They were just different.
Okay.
Who would you say are some of your sources of inspiration from over the years?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think what gave me the courage to try to do what I did, to make the transition from radio to voiceovers, I looked at some of the other people in the business who had done that. An example of that would be Casey Kasem, who started out as a DJ and went on to do American Top 40. I assume you must have heard that show at some point or other. The interesting thing about that show was it was not really a disc jockey job. The show was totally scripted. So he had to read that script and make it sound as though he was doing a DJ show. So it was really a voiceover gig. It was an acting gig, which people probably don't realize. But yeah. But Casey made the jump. There was a guy named Danny Dark, who you may or may not be familiar with. I think he did Super Friends in the 60s. But he had a huge career, mostly doing commercials. He was the voice of General Motors, the voice of General Foods. I think he was the voice of NBC for a number of years. Again, another guy who just came out of the DJ booth and got into voiceovers. Jack Angel, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. He was in Voltron. He was a disc jockey who made the jump. So I think, those are the guys that sort of gave me hope, like it can be done.
When you, so you were in radio for about 20 years before
Yeah.
you transitioned to voiceovers. What was it that disenfranchised you about the radio industry?
Oh gosh, the impermanence of the whole thing. You would barely get anything going and they would yank the rug out from under you. I mean, there's a million ways to get fired in the radio business. They sold the station. We got a new general manager. He wants to clean house. We got a new program director with 6 unemployed friends. You're out, you're out, you're out, you're out. And it just sort of wore me down after a certain point. And there are certain people, it's like, why did you even get in this business, I would ask myself. Because I got in it partially to have fun. And you would run across these administrators and it seemed like they took a blood oath. I'm going to suck all the joy out of this business. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to make these people hate every minute of their lives. And I just got tired of dealing with the children here. Tired of the bullshit. and having to answer that awful request line. I have a confession to make in case you don't know. They don't take requests at radio stations. They make you answer the phone and say, yeah, we'll get that right on. And then you never do, and they call back, where's my song? And it just, after a certain point, I just said, I can't take this anymore.
So, of all the accents you've ever done, what's your favorite type of accent to do?
Oh gosh, ones I'm good at. I do voices around the house, much to the annoyance of my wife. Some of them are not politically correct. I won't do them here. It's funny, I found out I'm not the only one. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about some other actor and comedian. He does voices around his house, and they're all politically incorrect, and he'll never do them in public. I thought, well, thank God I'm not alone. But I talk back to the television as various characters, and I do enjoy doing Russian for some reason. I like to get in this groove and just talk like this all day long. I don't know. Some of you may know I did. Colonel Volgan in Metal Gear Solid. And I showed up, they said he was Russian. I said, oh, this is wonderful. I will have a whole day of talking like this. He doesn't have an accent. I said, well, if that answered your question, I don't even remember what the question was.
What your favorite accent was?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, going back to the origins of Keith, you talked about Richard Crenna.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know why, but when I saw the picture of the character, I thought of the actor Richard Crenna. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was Colonel Troutman in the Rambo movies. It's over, Johnny.
It's over!
Yeah. That's right. Okay. I hear you.
You played Rambo, by the way, in the 80s animated show.
Yes, I did. But that's another story. Anyway, Richard Crenna was in a show on radio called Our Miss Brooks. It was about a school teacher. And he played one of the students, Walter Denton. And so I thought, I'll do Walter Denton. And it sort of took me up into a higher range and very enthusiastic, because that's kind of how Walter was. I recently heard Our Miss Brooks and realized that was a terrible impression of Richard Crenna. But it was good enough to get the job. But I'm no longer a fan of Our Miss Brooks, by the way. You learn, you grow. But
yeah, he sort of had more crinkle in his voice a little bit. Oh, Miss Brooks, why I forgot to do my geometry homework.
yeah. And so I stole from him a little bit. And that's where that voice came from.
One thing I've always admired about the Keith voice is how warm the character is. He's not tough as nails on his teammates. He's very upbeat, supporting, like the big brother everyone wishes they had. And I always loved the warmth that you brought to that character. So it may not have been a great Richard Crenna impression, but it really was a motivational and inspiring voice.
Oh, thank you. Well, a lot of credit should go to the writers, because they wrote that character in a very sympathetic way. So hopefully I brought that out. But I don't think the writers get enough credit in the business. You know, you hear all these clever things these actors say. They didn't think those up themselves. You know, some guy sat in a room staring at a blank page, thinking, "What the hell do I write now?"
And I would say Voltron. There are some places where there are some head scratcher moments in the original show, certainly with the things. But I think the adaptation of a show where you have, you're watching a pre-edited program and you are recording, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but recording to time, but they're writing to time as well. They have these lip flaps that are spaced out. You have a visual. You may not have a translation. And okay, we're doing 125 of these.
Yeah.
Crank them out, fill the lip flaps, and try to make them make sense.
Yeah. I read about the process of how it was all put together. I may not have it 100% correct, but essentially Ted Koppler and Peter Keith bought these existing Japanese shows with the idea of just revoicing them and putting them on the air. But then when they looked at what they had, they realized that a lot of it was inappropriate for, an American audience of young people. And eventually, as I understand it, they threw the whole thing out and just wrote original episodes and then had to dig through the video that they had to find scenes that supported what they'd written. Which is, it's like putting together what do you call it? Not a crossword puzzle, but a jigsaw puzzle, where you don't even have the finished picture to look at. It had to be maddening. I wasn't involved in any of that, obviously.
We have all marveled at how this actually came together to something that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the recording was completely different from the way most animation is done. Most animation, once the script is written, then the actors come in. And once the voice tracks are laid down, then the animators start to do the drawing. But this was in reverse. The picture already existed. We had to do the dialogue onto the picture. And so each line was timed out to match the lips of the character, and you had to hit the time. And it was incredibly frustrating, especially some of the longer lines that went into 25 seconds. And you'd do it, and they'd go, that's the idea, but you're 2 seconds long. Oh, now you're 1 second short. Oh, now you're 1.5 seconds long again. And this, it was not easy, but it was worth it.
And then when it came to the third dimension, they did have original episodes in that. So how was the third dimension recordings compared to that?
Much more like a traditional animation session for, voice actors. We didn't have to hit specific times. We could work together as a group. Again, with Voltron, we worked separately because having to hit these timings, it really wasn't practical to have 5 actors in the room together. So we would just show up at intervals, and I would say hi to the actor who was leaving, and then I'd do my thing, and then I'd say hi to the actor who was coming in, and so we worked along.
And you had the role of Keith in the third dimension, but you also had Amalgamus.
Right. Yeah, that was a new character they created for that show.
And Pidge had gone to Billy West.
Yes, yeah, and I never found out why, and I don't care.
So let's talk about Pidge, but not just Pidge, but in Voltron you also did some other younger, higher registered characters. Pidge had in the vehicle team episodes a twin brother named Chip who had a similar but certainly not identical sound.
Yeah.
There was a Prince Bandor, another young person who had his voice up in those upper registers. Is that a particular unique strength of yours among male voice actors of the time? Or, is this just an example of your elastic voice? And how did Pidge come about? I know that's a large question.
Yeah. Well, again, I was relatively new, and this was the first big animation job I ever bagged, and I thought I was just going to do Keith, and then I came in, and Franklin Kofod handed me this picture of what looked like an elf wearing glasses, and he said, "What do you got for this guy?" And I immediately panic set in.
And I just started, well, what about something like this, And he's,
Fine, perfect. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do one episode. And then I find out it's a recurring character, and then I find out I got to do it's sort of his twin brother in the other episode, but somehow make it the same but different. And same with Keith, and I don't even know what that is. Chip, yeah.
Jeff.
Oh, Jeff. Yeah.
Jeff was the other.
Okay. Yeah.
Jeff, the other Keith.
So in looking at all the things that you did with Voltron, you started with Voltron Defender of the Universe in 1984.
Mhm.
And then you came to Voltron the Third Dimension. And then you've also done Voltron, there was a THQ video game. And then there was also the Happy Honda Days commercial.
Oh, yeah.
So you did all these different versions of Keith in all these different things. And so of all the mediums, which was your favorite to do Voltron in?
Well, the show, I think, I
Probably paid the best, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
125 episodes, right?
I'm not, please. I thought I'd never have to work again. It shows you how naive. It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this. It's a lot of people think if they've seen somebody on television once, they must be fabulously wealthy, and that's not how it works. Obviously, the stars are fabulously wealthy, but the plain rap actors, don't do that great. I remember one time I was involved in a video production way before I got involved in voiceovers, and we ended up driving up from San Diego to LA, and we're in a restaurant, and I see a woman that I had seen on Laugh-In a couple of years previously, and she's waiting tables. And I thought, oh boy. The guy I was with went over and talked to her. She said, well, things are a little tough. I can't get into acting work. I got to do this. Mm-hmm. And I thought, God, from Laugh-In to, hi folks, I'll be your server this evening. It kind of shocked me, but that's the way it is,
Did you ever worry when you were doing voiceover for like commercials, or you were a product sponsor or something like that, an announcer for a product? Did you ever think that maybe my name is going to get associated with this product for life, like Michael Bell's did with butter?
I should live so long. No, I was never worried about that.
Okay.
Me. That's what you hope for. Well, you'll be the voice of whatever, and it'll last for 50 years, and you'll make all kinds of money. You're hoping.
Right.
Those are few and far between. I remember I talked to an engineer who said, Michael came here to do a job right after he auditioned for Arcade.
Yeah.
And he came in furious.
I just spent an hour going, butter, butter, butter. This is a crazy damn business room.
And then he goes out to make millions. So,
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
So did you ever have conversations like that with Michael, BJ, Peter Cullen, anything like that about all their other work?
I suppose. We just mostly told stupid jokes. I took a voiceover workshop with Michael. He's a very good teacher, excellent teacher. I think he has some classes online if you look him up, if you're interested in maybe becoming a voice actor, God help us. But he's a wonderful teacher. He did this animation workshop, and as I said, I was very new to the business and suffering from imposter syndrome, and I thought, I've got to get my act together. So I would take his class at night, and then we'd show up to do G.I. Joe the next morning. And I was playing catch up.
With as many roles as you played, and certainly in the 80s with the very many shows you were doing at the same time, and then with Voltron, in the sense you came back to do the third dimension some 14 years after the original show was done. How do you recall a voice? Do you know what I mean? If you're going into a studio now you're going to do Inhumanoids and do some character, how do you bring that back?
Well, for the most part, when you show up to do the first session, they have a reference tape available. Tape. Well, it was tape in those days. And it's usually the audition that you did to get the part, and they'll play it for you to refresh your memory. I was so busy at one point that I had this little cassette, and it had all my characters on there. And I would sit in the parking lot and just listen to this cassette before I went into the session, just to remind me of what the character sounded like. And so that's kind of how you keep track. But if you're working a show on a regular basis, 3 or 4 sessions in, you don't need to be reminded. You know how to do that, of course. But coming back after 14 years, you do have to listen to the reference.
Yeah, and on the subject of keeping track of things, one thing that amazes me about this book, Vocal Recall, available now, is that your recollection is amazing. How do you have that level of vocal recall about, your various jobs over the years? That's astounding to me. I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
I know. I don't know why. It's funny. One of the sections in the book deals with my radio career, and I sent the chapter to a guy that I work with. And I said, please read this, and if I've got anything wrong in here, please let me know. I don't want to publish something that's not true. And he called back and he said, you have such a wonderful memory. He says, I don't remember half of this stuff. I guess it's true, but I've forgotten all of this. And I don't know why it sticks with me. Just the way my brain works. The way I wrote the book was I would do some of my best thinking when I was jogging. I used to jog in those days, and I would just run a chapter through my mind, and I would think about the time period, and little nuggets would come back. If you focus think about something, I don't know, that happened to you 10 years ago, and just sit quietly and focus on it, you'll be surprised at how much comes back if you just sit and think about it for a while. I don't know, but maybe I just... it's a curse, because I also remember some terrible stuff that I just as soon not think about, but it pops in there, usually about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Even though everybody would consider you an expert, in your field, that you always take the approach of a white belt. Can you describe that?
Yeah. Well, I took martial arts for a while, and the guy who taught me was taught by a really top-notch guy, a guy who used to work with Bruce Lee. His name is Dan Inosanto. He teaches Filipino Kali, Eskrima. And that was his philosophy. And the minute I heard it expressed, I thought, that's kind of the way I've always operated. He says, I don't belts, colors. When you're a beginner, they give you a white belt. He said, I'm a lifelong white belt. I'm always learning. I don't ever want to think like, okay, I got it. I want to keep growing. I want to keep learning. I want to keep studying new things. I'm a lifelong white belt. And I thought, that's me too. I don't ever assume I've got it nailed. I'm always looking at how do I fix this? How do I make it better? How do I improve? How do I learn?
I love that approach. Love it.
I think it's the best way to go, honest to God.
Yeah, and not just professionally, but in life.
Yeah.
I mean, we should all strive to learn. There's so many things you can learn about the world and to develop as a person. It never stops if you keep working at it. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to learn is what are the questions that these folks have for Neil. So I'm going to go out into the the crowd here and
Starting to
start
do the Phil Donahue.
asking questions.
Don't forget to do the smarmy Phil Donahue smile.
All right, we'll be back in just
Start right here.
So I find it interesting that you said you started rather naive with Voltron being such an opposite production. Did that actually help you with your career later on when it went back the other way, when you didn't have to worry about the timing, but that experience, did it help at all?
Yeah, I think it did, because when you work with other actors and you're not interrupted, you can play scenes together and you sort of feed off their energy and they feed off your energy. I always describe the analogy to me as a really good volley in tennis, to the point where you don't give a damn who wins the point. The volley is so great. And you see 2 or 3 actors who really have it in, really nailed their characters and their timing, and it flows like a wonderful volley in tennis. But when you're working alone, you have to sort of crank that energy up out of nowhere. And that helped me when I started doing games, because games are the same thing. You're doing these lines isolated, you're working alone, you don't really know what you're reacting to. So yeah, it did help me in games later on when those came along.
I got really excited when you started talking about radio dramas because I grew up listening to radio dramas, and my absolute favorite of all time was Donovan's Brain, and I would love to know what your favorite radio drama was.
Oh gosh, I don't think I've ever heard Donovan's Brain.
So good.
I'll have to check that
It was
out.
Suspense.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So, well, I've obviously heard Suspense. I don't think I've heard that episode. Yeah, radio drama, I don't want to bore you, but I just think it's wonderful. They call it, the phrase they use is the theater of the mind.
Yes.
And it's true. I mean, I don't care, AI, CG, there's nothing they can do on a screen that's better than what happens in your head if you're listening to a really well-written, produced, and acted drama. A couple of shows I've gotten into recently that I really like a lot feature Jack Webb, who later went on to do Dragnet. Yes, thank you. But he did a couple before then. Jeff Regan, Investigator, and another one about a guy, Pat Novak for Hire, a guy in San Francisco. And they're just so well done that another one I like is The Lineup. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a good show.
Recommendation.
Question. As far as you said, voiceover when you kind of started out versus now, I don't know how around the scene you are these days, but what's your experience been of how they differ and how you think that kind of came about?
It's done a complete 180. When I first got in, as I think I mentioned earlier, voiceover was one of the best kept secrets in show business. Nobody knew the business even existed, and there were just a relative handful of people who were doing it, and they were really firmly entrenched. The producers would hire them over and over and over again because they were so good. They delivered. They didn't have to worry about getting a lousy performance. They knew they could count on these guys. So the tough thing was to break in. You kind of had to wait for somebody to get sick or drop dead or something so you could get in the room and show what you could do. Now it's done a complete 180. The cat's out of the bag. Everybody in the world wants to be a voice actor. And of course, with the internet now, people can submit auditions from all over the country. They can work from all over the country. So now you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of voice actors competing for a relative handful of jobs. So it's just as difficult now as it was then, just for different reasons. And
Can I ask an add-on to that? One thing that I've noticed, especially in animated features, is that a lot of A-list celebrities from live-action productions, television and films, have gotten in and done voice work.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that impact?
oh yes.
Okay, I was just curious. What are your thoughts on that?
It is what it is. We had a nice little thing all to ourselves, and then I don't know what broke the bank. I think it was Kathleen Turner doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit, although she refused screen credit. at the time. I think she would probably take it now. And Gene Hackman starting to do voiceovers. And I think those, especially Gene Hackman, was so respected in Hollywood that it sort of became okay to do voiceovers. Up to a certain point, it was like, well, I'm a film actor, I don't do voiceovers. And then, oh, Gene Hackman is doing them and making a lot of money. Perhaps I will reconsider my approach. And yeah, they came in and they took away a lot of the work. But, you know, it is what it is.
So you mentioned voice. How much of the personality that you put into each character actually came from you and not direction or what you saw on the video?
It's a curious combination of what you bring to it, what the director brings, what the writer brought. It's like a whole broth that hopefully turns into a delicious stew by the time you're finished. But it's a collaborative job from start to finish. I mean, my job is to give them what they want, which is really difficult because sometimes they don't know what they want. And sometimes they don't know that they don't know what they want. So, yeah.
When you have multiple characters in the same scene, are they recorded separately or do you bounce back and forth between them?
Usually the director will ask, what do you want to do? Do you want to do them separately and somebody will splice them together, or do you want to try to do the whole thing as both characters? And it sort of depends on you know, how you're feeling that day and how complicated the scene is. And, so it could go either way. Usually they'll give you an option. You know.
If I remember correctly, I believe Mr. Bell last year said that he and you had to do the mice voices in Voltron. Do you ever get fans that request for you to do that for them?
No, thank goodness. I worked alone, but one day Franklin Kofod said, we're going to hold Michael over and you're going to work with him, you're going to do something. And they told us, we want giggling, simpering princesses. Michael and I are looking at each other and it's like, really? Why don't you hire a couple of ladies to do that? And, that's not in the budget. So we had to do that. And, that was probably the 20 most embarrassing minutes of my life.
I'd like to interject a question. How do you physically take care of your voice? My voice goes out by the end of every single VoltCon weekend. How do you, or if you catch a cold or whatever else, how do you take care of the moneymaker?
You know, I've never really found anything that helps. You kind of hope for the best. I do some kind of vocal exercises in the mornings. I don't know how helpful that is. And of course, we're a lot more conscious of our voices than anybody else is. And I remember talking to Danny Dark once, who I mentioned earlier. And he said, boy, you know, you ever have one of those days where you come in and your voice is just great and you do the spot and then the bastards call you back 2 days later to make some change and now your voice is horrible. And I said, Danny, I've never heard you be any less than 100%. Oh, no, I have some days where, I have no voice. So I thought, oh, I guess I'm not alone. But as I said, I never heard him anything less than 100%. So maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. But yeah, I get to the end of certain days, especially with a situation like this where I have to project a lot. And I got nothing left either.
Hi there. Is it time for bed yet?
All right, well, we are at our time for this panel. I want to thank everybody for participating with Neil Ross here at VoltCon 2025. Don't forget to go to Neil's panel and Neil's table right after this for the autograph session. Thank you. Thank you. Character is like that. And
And the minute he said the last detail, I knew what they wanted.
And I went into this sort of Nicholson-esque voice, the way he used to sound when he was a young guy. Now he sounds like this, last time I heard.
But, when I finished, the guy in the corner said, "You got it," which is usually the kiss of death when I tell you you got it, you didn't get it. But,